So today we're starting a new series called I Want to Believe, But. And as we dive in, I want to explain real quickly kind of the heart behind what we're going to be talking about these next few weeks. I think that the spiritual landscape of our country has really kind of gone through a shift in the last few decades. People sort of used to be categorized in the U.S., and this was an oversimplification, but they used to be sort of categorized into two groups. You had the believers, right? The Christians, the Christ followers, the ones who believe in God, and then you had the non-believers, the atheists, the ones that had written God off or the idea of God off completely. And these days, in our culture, there's another group that is really emerging, and it's a large, large group. It's a growing category where the people are kind of saying, I want to believe in God, but I'm struggling to. And it could be that they don't sense that God is answering their prayers. It could be that they want to feel God, but they just can't seem to feel Him. It could be that they see the Christian faith as having way too many rules and it's too restricting. But something is going on that's just causing them to hold God off. And it's not necessarily like a full-on rejection. Like they wouldn't call themselves atheists, but at the same time, they aren't really seeking hard after God either. And they would be people that would say, I want to believe, but. So here's the premise for this series. I think a lot of people are holding God off at arm's length, but the reason is because in many cases, they have a very distorted view of God. They're rejecting or holding off what's essentially a false image or false picture of God. And they hold up this distorted version and then they say, yep, it's just really hard for me to believe in that. But they're not really rejecting God, right? What they're rejecting is a distorted view, a distorted version of God. And so in this series over the next few weeks, I want to talk about three, I think, very common distorted views of God that people hold. Some very common misunderstandings of what God is like. And so I want to talk about what we often assume God is like. And then I want us to think about the God that Jesus actually explained to us. So I'll tell you where we're going in this series. Sometimes you kind of have to come and it's just see as we go. I'm going to lay it all out there this morning. Next week, I want to talk about what I'll call, and I've got they're so cute little names for each version of God. And so next week, I want to talk about what we're going to call goosebump God. And this would be people that would say, okay, I want to believe in God, but I don't feel anything. I don't feel anything. I try to read the Bible, but I don't feel anything. Okay, I come to church, but I don't feel anything. When everyone is singing and all the people are just going crazy, because that's how our church is. We go crazy. I see that happening. There's a lady in the front row and she's weeping and I don't feel anything. So how am I supposed to believe in a God that I can't see, I can't hear, and I don't feel? Like I want to believe, but I don't feel anything. Okay, so that's goosebump God next week. And then in the third week, we're gonna talk about what I'm calling killjoy God. I want to believe in God, right? But there's way too many rules. There's all these rules. I want to live a life that's like fun. I want to have faith and I want to have fun. So I want to live the life that's fun. So I just can't commit to this whole thing. I can't go like deep into it. I want to believe, but I also want to enjoy my life. So if I go all in with God, my life, let's face it, okay, this is very Christian of me to say, but it's going to suck. So, okay, that's killjoy God, week 3. Now, the truth is, if we look at the God that Jesus explained and that Jesus taught us about, we recognize that goosebump God does not exist. And killjoy God does not exist. So rejecting God because of that stuff isn't really rejecting God at all. It's just rejecting some distorted view of God. But today I want to kick this off with another common distorted view. And I want to get into this in a way that I hope is kind of fun. But I confess this might be a lot more fun for some of you than others. Here's what I mean. Over the years, Brookview has always kind of been known to be a young church. Because when we first started, way back in 2003, almost all of us that started the church were in our 20s. Now, we didn't design it that way. That was not, it's just sort of what happened. We started putting together a team and we invited all kinds of people, but it was like the 20-somethings that showed up. And so here's the thing about churches that's just generally true. It's generally true that you draw who you are, right? Because young people know young people, they invite young people, and you just get more young people. And so we've kind of always been a youngish church. Now, thankfully, we're getting more and more balanced out, aren't we? Yeah, praise the Lord. Because I would get sick of all of you 20-somethings, okay? But yeah. So, and here's the other thing. This is just sort of weird how this happens. All those 20-somethings back in 2003, they're now like 30-somethings and like 40-somethings. And it's crazy because I myself am 32. And I mean, I know I don't look it, but today what I'm going to do, I want to kick this off by honoring the more mature among us. And so I want to say, like, if you're a millennial, I love you. I love your Snapchatting way of life. I love you. But so much of our church is geared toward you. And so today we're going to give a little love to the more mature among us. And so I will say, if you're a Gen Xer or you're a boomer, or Eloise, if you're a builder, I need you to give me some enthusiasm. I need some response from you. I need some energy for this. And if you don't give me energy for this, I am never going to appeal to your age group again. Because the millennials, they know how to get into stuff, okay? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to throw out some old TV shows. And if you're an Xer or you're a boomer, then you probably know these. And so if you recognize these shows, then I need you to make a little bit of noise. Okay, so you can clap, you can give me a woot woot, you can just give a shout out or whatever, okay? But I don't know if you go, very far back with television. It was interesting because back in the day, it seemed like the best shows sort of came in pairs. And so how many of you remember, and give me some feedback, how many of you remember the combination of The Love Boat and Fantasy Island? Oh, man. What did that little guy say? The plane. Now, if you're into Snapchat, you have no idea. Okay, I just want to say, hang tight for a minute. We'll come back to you. Get over it. All right, how about Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley? Yes, sir. I mean, the Fonz. There was no cooler guy on earth than that guy. And then there was, and this I love this, the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman. Yes, sir. Lee Majors and Lindsay Wagner. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Lindsay Wagner, okay, the Bionic Woman, was my first crush. And so, and I've mentioned this before, I actually had a Bionic Woman lunchbox. And I know some of you might be wondering, wait a minute, your mom let you go to school with a Bionic Woman lunchbox? Like, she didn't, steer you toward Superman or Batman or at least the, $6 Million Man or something? Like, no, man, my mom was progressive. And honestly, she knew that it was, Lindsay Wagner, she wasn't my hero. She was my crush. And so she and I had lunch dates every day. It was amazing. Okay, I got one more. This one doesn't really have a parallel because it's so epic. It was strong all by itself. Now, the Bionic Woman, first crush for me, but then she sort of got replaced by a whole team of ladies on Charlie's Angels. Oh, Will. And I have to tell you, I was captivated. Captivated. Just found myself as a kid, young boy, captivated because the acting was so good. It was amazing. Actually, Charlie's Angels was like a predecessor, early predecessor to another show. There will not be an image of this one going up, but it was a predecessor to another show called Baywatch, which took it to a whole nother level. Okay, now, Baywatch was so provocative that I never watched that show. But I knew all about it because I read the novel. So, yeah. Because you can't imagine your pastor watching Baywatch, right? That's wrong. Now, if you remember these shows, then you also know that what I'm going to say next is absolutely true. And for you Snapchatting millennials, this may blow your mind. But in order back in the day to watch your favorite show, you actually had to be in front of the TV at the exact moment the show came on. I know, it's crazy. That's insane, isn't it? And so if your show was on at Friday night, on Friday night, you had to be in front of a TV on Friday night at 8 o'clock or whatever time it was. And guess what else? You had to watch all the commercials. Oh my goodness. Now, thank God we're living in a new day. Because you can binge watch without commercials. How many of you binge watched something this week? Oh yeah. Like you can watch, like even on your portable device, for heaven's sakes, you don't have to be home. Now we live in what I think we could reasonably call an on-demand society, right? We live in an on-demand society. We're used to getting whatever we want whenever we want it. We want it now. And this is just sort of how life works. This is what we expect. This is actually what we demand. I know I do. Like if I order from Amazon and we've got Amazon Prime, like that's not good enough. I want like same day delivery. I want to order it and have it at my house today, right? Now, because we live in an on-demand society, I think what happens is it's really easy for Christians to sort of want an on-demand God. Like I pray for it on Tuesday morning, and I want it done for me by Tuesday night. I want what I want, and I want it delivered to me, God, right now. We want an on-demand God. And the thing is, on-demand God works really great until it doesn't. And some of you have experienced that in some really hard ways. Like as a teenager, maybe, you prayed and prayed and prayed, and you prayed for your parents' marriage to get better and to make it, and they got divorced anyway. And your world was rocked, and you were just left going, what's up with that, God? Or you give to people, you're very generous, or you give to the church, or you do lots of really good things, and yet you're still struggling financially. And it's like, come on, God, where's my break? Where's my break? All these other people are getting one. Where's mine? Or your life group has been praying for someone, and yet nothing seems to be getting better. And it just starts to feel like, God, what's up? Where are you? And sometimes people end up concluding, if God didn't do what I know he could have done when I asked him to do it, then either God isn't real, or he isn't powerful, or he just doesn't care. And essentially what we're asking for, whether we think of it in these terms or not, what we're saying is, where is my on-demand God? But of course, the answer to that question is, on-demand God does not exist. On-demand God does not exist. And as much as our wants and needs seem so legitimate to us in the moment, God has never promised to give us everything that we want right now. Now, this seems really obvious, right? It seems obvious until we don't get something that we want, something that we feel like God would want us to have. And when this becomes personal and when it's painful, it's hard because you have your agenda for God and so do I. But what's biblical and what's true and what's sometimes so hard to accept is this. It turns out God has his own agenda. God has his own agenda. And however much it might seem to me like my agenda is really good, like my agenda is right, like my agenda should be or would be God's, God has his own agenda. And I just want to say at this point, thank God he does. Thank God he does. Because just think about this from someone else's perspective, okay? Think about the annoying lady in the cubicle next to you. Do you want him to adopt your coworker's agenda? Do you? Do you want him to take on your neighbor's agenda? And I don't mean like part of it. I mean like if he's going to take it on, he's going to take all of it. Would you want God to do everything that they want? Would you? Do you want him to adopt my agenda? Like all of it? I'll just want to say, you don't want that. I mean, if you trust me that much, stop it. So the big idea for today is very simple. On-demand God does not exist. God has his own agenda. God is not our cosmic sugar daddy who delivers exactly what we want when we want it. He's not our awesome genie in the sky where if we ask just right and we rub the lamp just right, he spits out whatever our wishes are. God has his own agenda. He will not be manipulated. He will not be coerced. He will not be bribed. There are no magic words that somehow magically unlock his blessing. And we look at that and we go, okay, well, if that's true, why follow? Why seek him? Why worship? And I want to spend the rest of the message just sort of thinking about that. If he's not on-demand God, then who is he? What is he like? When Jesus taught us about his Father, what are some of the things that he taught? And today I want to highlight 3 really important characteristics of God that I think Jesus clearly taught us. And the first is this: God's heart is always loving. His heart is always loving. And you can think of it in this way, right? And this is an easy way to think of it. How many of you are parents? Raise your hand if you're a parent, okay? You have raised kids already, or you're currently raising kids. I will say, parents, there are two things that I know about you. And the first is there is never, ever a time that you don't love your children. Now, there might be times where you don't enjoy your children, right? I mean, bratty, selfish behavior sucks. And it happens. And there might be moments where you want a break. But even in those moments, you still love your kids. There is never a time when you don't love them. Second thing I know about you, okay? And I can promise that this is true of you. There are times when you do not do what they want you to do for them. Like, even though you have the power to do it, you don't. There are times when they are asking you to do something and you have the power to do it, and even though you still love them, you don't do it. And part of the tension is this. You want to see something developed in them, right? You want to see something developed in them, and you know that they will be robbed of it if you do too much for them. Right? Like, man, Mom, I forgot my lunch today. Mom, I forgot my lunch. Will you bring it to school? Right? Now, you have the power to do it. It might be a little inconvenient, but you could do it. And yet you say, heck no. This is the 3rd time this week that you have forgotten your lunch. So maybe if you go hungry for a day, you'll remember. Right? You could do something for them, but it might get in the way of something happening in them. And if you love your kids, then you want character for them. You want them to be people of character. You want something very strong to well up inside of them. And so sometimes you don't give them what they want because you love them, because you care about who they become, and you have a higher plan for them. Now, do they always understand the plan? No. Do they always love your plan? No. But as a parent, can we just be honest? Sometimes we know better, right? Now, I want to look at a scripture that sort of describes this in a powerful way. The idea that God's heart is always loving. Like no matter what happens, even when you don't understand it, when you wish it weren't so, when you know God could do something different. Okay, God's heart, his character, his nature is always loving. And we see this described beautifully in Romans chapter 8. Paul is writing to followers of Jesus that are going through unthinkably hard things. I mean, unbelievably hard things. And Paul writes this to them. He says, "Who shall separate us from the love of Christ?" Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? And then he lists off some things that they were facing. Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? Now, before we move on, I want to kind of bring that to where you and I live today, because chances are pretty good that these are not your issues. I mean, my guess is that none of you are going to be naked this week with someone waving a sword in your face. And I just want you to know, if you are and that happens to you, please get a hold of me, because I want to hear all about that. That would be so interesting. Okay? But this was like their everyday experience. This was real life. It was their real experience. It's not ours. So here's how Paul might say it if he were talking directly to you or me. He might say, "What shall separate you from the love of Christ? Shall financial trouble? Shall relational hardship? Shall the loss of your health? Shall the loss of someone that you love? Shall unemployment? Shall depression?" And he answers it in this way. He says, "No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through" what? "Through him who loved us." He says, "For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord." And the simple way of saying that is just God's heart is always loving. It's always loving. And what God wants us to recognize is that God doesn't just prove for us his love over and over again by doing whatever it is that we want. What he wants us to recognize is that he already proved his love to us when he sent to us his son Jesus. When God in a human body laid down his life on the cross to set us free. And he wants us to internalize that. So he shouldn't need to reprove his love day after day after day to sort of give us whatever we want so that we know we're loved. God has already undeniably proven his love for us. And no matter what circumstances we may face, God's heart is always, always loving. When you don't understand, when you wish it were different, God is asking you to remember that his heart for you is always loving. Okay, and then a second thing that we know about God, that Jesus taught us about God, is this. God's ways are always higher. They're always higher. In fact, there are so many things that happen where, as a pastor, people sort of come to me, or they'll go to pastors and ask, what is God doing? Like, why is God allowing this? And I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to make something up when I get those questions. So there are so many times where I get that question and it's heartfelt and I know that it's deeply felt, and I have to just say, you know what? I don't know. I don't understand. What you're asking is way above my pay grade. And so I won't even attempt to bring an explanation, because an explanation would be insulting. It would be unfair. It would be pretentious. It would be presuming to know things that I can't possibly know based on my finite ability to comprehend. So a child is born with a disability. Why did this happen? I don't know. A great person is taken in the prime of their life. And you know how the story goes. It's crazy. You know how the story goes. The drunk driver hits the great person, and it's the great person that dies, and the drunk driver lives. Why did God allow that? Why does God allow that? I have no idea. There's a terrorist attack and many innocent people are killed or maimed or injured. Why did God allow this? I can't explain it. I won't even attempt to. I'm not qualified. And so I just have to stay away from explanations. And I have to embrace the truth and hold on to the reality that God's ways are higher than my ways. The prophet Isaiah said it this way. He's speaking, this is for God speaking to us. He says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth," that's like a lot higher, "so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." And we think, oh, I know so much more than my 3-year-old. Let me tell you, my ways are higher than yours. I have an agenda for you, and it's better than yours. Do you think God is looking at us, and that is like, you multiply that by millions? And there are those times that we just have to admit, I don't understand. I can't bring an explanation. Based on everything I know, this does not make sense. But maybe, just maybe, okay, it's possible that God knows something that I don't know. And maybe he's up to something that I don't understand. Because if God is real, and if God created all that is, then clearly God's ways are higher than mine. And if I was God, I wouldn't have done it that way. Okay, thankfully for all of you, I am not God. I mean, God knows the end from the beginning. He's already in tomorrow, and he has a divine purpose that we can't currently comprehend. And often, God takes the things that we would never ever want, and he brings unthinkable beauty out of them. Often he does something in us along the way as well. Like he's in this process of conforming us to the image of Christ. God's ways are always higher. And sometimes it's interesting because the thing that you think like you really want right now, when you end up looking at your life in the rearview mirror and you look back on it years later, you realize, man, if I'd had that, that would have been so much less. God actually had something so much better. Does that happen? It's crazy. Let me give you a little illustration of what I'm talking about. And this is a cheesy illustration, so I don't want any emails about it. For my whole life, I had always flown on economy class. But a few years ago, Jen and I went to Haiti, and we brought down tons of extra supplies, which meant extra bags, and we went with our 3 kids, and we realized with all the extra bags we're bringing down with stuff for the Haitians, it's actually going to cost about the same amount to fly business class because of the baggage fees. By the time we paid for the extra bags in economy class, we could actually fly business class for the same amount. In fact, and we calculated it out, because they feed us full meals on every leg of a business class flight, we'll actually save money because think of all the food we don't have to buy in the airport. And so, for the first time in my life, I flew business class. Now, I had always walked through business class, and I would see all those snotty people. But then the flight attendant would give you the dark look and close the curtain, and you'd have no idea what goes on over there. It was just a mystery. And so I want to say for those of you that have never sat in business class, I'm going to explain to you what happens on the other side of the curtain. It's crazy. First of all, when you sit down, they offer you water. Like before the plane even takes off, they offer you water. And it's not in those cheap plastic cups, right? It's in like real glass. It's so classic. I just pound in it. Like this is the most delicious water I've ever had. And then the flight attendant, offers warm nuts. Until that day, I had no idea that it was better to warm your nuts. Guys, I just want you to know warm nuts are better. And that was just like the beginning. We haven't gotten into this thing yet. And then she comes over and she's like, Mr. Huguenin. I'm like, yes, ma'am. They call you by name in business class. Would you like some wine or a cocktail? Huh. And for dinner, would you like the salmon or the filet mignon? And then like the lights go out after dinner, maybe a glass of wine, and your chair, it lays completely out flat. While all the other people are like cramped back in economy class, and somebody's sitting in between two huge dudes, and they're just like, eh. You're just like, oh yeah, sleeping away. It was unbelievable. Unbelievable. And I slept like a baby. And then I got awoken, and I was like, what? To an offer of a warm, moist towel. What is that? I was like, what am I even supposed to do with this? I'm holding it like, I don't even know, but apparently it's like if in case you sweat in your sleep or something, you can wipe yourself down with it's like a spa. So when we landed, I was like, do I have to get off? Like, I want to stay, like, I want to live here. Now, in economy class, when we land, this is me, this may be some of you, I start getting a little anxious. I start getting this like claustrophobic feeling. Does that happen to anybody else? You start seeing all the people stand up and it's just like, I got to get off this plane. That doesn't happen in business class. And it was amazing. Like when we got to Haiti, I felt refreshed. I felt like I didn't feel like a zombie like I usually do after that much travel. Guys, the other side of the curtain is like heaven. Okay, so here's where I'm going with this. Sometimes you're going through life, and God doesn't give you the economy class seat because he's actually working to get you into business class. It's brilliant, isn't it? And you've seen this happen. You've had this happen, and you can see it when you look back in your life at times. Maybe right now, you're here and you're all upset because, you're all upset at God because the guy that you're digging isn't digging you back, right? He's pulling back. He's being all weird and distant, and it's freaking you out, and you're just like, but God, I wanted him, but God, I wanted him, but God, I wanted him. And then years later, you go down years later, and guess what? You'll see that he was an economy class boy, and God had for you a business class man. Right? Right? So it's like instead of a cold bag of pretzels, you get this man that's like where stuff is all warm. Right? Like filet mignon, and warm cloth and all that kind of stuff. And I will say, this happened to me, so to speak, because I was dating years ago, and I lost the girl that I thought I would marry, and it was hard and it was depressing. But looking back on it now, she was an economy class girl. And God had prepared for me a business class woman. Where are you, baby? Oh, God bless you. God's ways are higher. Right? Okay, you've seen this happen. You know you have. You wanted the house, and then you didn't get the house, and somebody underbid you, and you lost out, and you were devastated, and because you'd already moved into the place in your mind, right? But then 6 months later, there was this better house in a better location at a better price. And what's amazing is that you now have this unbelievable friendship with the people that live next door. And they've become friends, deep friends, and you rely on them and they rely on you. And you have carried each other through some dark times. And now you look back on all of that and you think, thank God. Sometimes blessings come in ways that we'd never ask for or expect. Sometimes what looks like a curse comes with all these unanticipated blessings. A child is born with something that isn't quite right. And then years later, You embrace that child who's now 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years old, and you think, oh God, this child is perfect in every way. And I never could have imagined how much love and joy this would bring to me. Or maybe you lost somebody years ago, and you would never want to go through that again. You'd never, ever draw it up that way. But as a result of that loss, because of the circumstances in the situation, God brought some other amazing people into your life. And now you can't imagine life without them. See, whenever we bump up against that, why didn't God? You can recognize this. There's so much that you don't know. But you can count on this. God's heart is always loving, and God's ways are always higher. And then there's one more thing God is inviting us to embrace, and it's this. That there is nothing like the presence of God. There's nothing like the presence of God. And at this point, I'd like to say something to some of you. If you're kind of like, and you would put yourself in this category, kind of like a marginal Christian. Like to you, faith is kind of cool, but it's not really central to your life. So like you come to church when you can, and ultimately you go, yeah, I believe in God. I mean, if you want to push me one way or the other, I think that's more likely. You're not an atheist. You don't deny the existence of God, but you know you're not passionately seeking him either. I just want to tell you, like point blank, as tenderly as I can, that God is inviting you to something more. He's inviting you to something more. And you don't have to accept his invitation. He'll still love you if you don't. You don't have to accept his invitation. But if you don't, you are settling for so much less. There's so much more to this than a little bit of church and some vague belief in an afterlife. When you give God your heart and you give God your life and you start to seek him above all else, when you start to ask him to reveal himself to you and you pray and you read his word and you worship regularly and you put yourself in situations and places where you could encounter him, and when you ask him to show you how to walk with him, and then he starts to show you something and you respond to that, and then he shows you something else and you respond to that, it is truly amazing. And what happens is you get to know his presence. And you begin to realize that he's always with you, that he'll never leave you, that he will never forsake you. And then one day, something hits you, something bad happens. And because you know him so well, because that relationship has been cultivated, you can honestly say, I don't have to worry about what will happen to me because I know my God is with me. I don't have to worry about what will happen to me because I know my God is with me. And this is where David, like David, the shepherd boy who became king, the boy that fought Goliath, that stepped out on a battlefield and fought Goliath because of his incredible faith in God. David learned how to live in this intimate place with God. And before you say, well, that was just David, he was like, not human. He was like a man after God's own heart. Consider that David was also a guy that wrestled with all kinds of really tough questions. In fact, he threw more questions at God than most of us ever will. David had these long seasons of his life where things just went horribly wrong. He did the right thing and bad things happened. And he did the right thing and bad things happened. And he did the right thing and bad things happened. And if you read his cries in the Psalms, in these worship songs that he wrote from those seasons, it's like, God, where are you? God, why is Saul hunting me down to kill me? I've been innocent. Why are the wicked prospering? Why are you letting evil people have success while I'm hiding away in caves? Where are you, God? Like, what are you doing, God? This isn't fair, God. When are you going to hear my cries? And it just goes on and on and on. Because the circumstances of his life were falling apart and he was hurting, but yet he grew in his intimacy with God. And he started to recognize that God would never leave him, that God was always with him. And the same guy that asked all of those very pressing and very real questions eventually wrote this in Psalm 23. He said, even though I walk through the darkest valley, even though I hate it, even though I don't understand it, even though I could lose my life, even though all hell is breaking loose, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. Why? For you are with me, God. For you are with me. I don't have to worry about what will happen to me, he's saying, because I know God is with me. And you know what's interesting, and here's what I've noticed, and maybe you've noticed this too. I'm always praying for God to lift me to the mountaintops, right? I want to live on the mountaintops. God placed me on the mountaintop, but I find that I experienced God most intimately in the valleys. It's when I need him. It's when I'm broken that he becomes most real to me. It's just how it's worked in my life. And I will tell you, and many of you know, that right now I am going through one of the darkest, scariest seasons of my life. Because for the last 4 years, I've watched my son just deteriorate. And he got a concussion when he was playing football at age 13. And right afterwards, his personality started to change. He started to become like unusually emotional. And that just sort of went on for about a year. And then he started to make decisions that were really out of character. And those decisions started to cost him dearly. And he lost football and he lost basketball, and they were a really big deal to him. And he lost school, and he lost his friends. And he just continued to spiral. And we tried all kinds of things. We took him to all kinds of doctors. And then in January, this last January, on the night of Chris Perry's memorial service, my 17-year-old attempted suicide. And I look at the reality of all that's gone on, and I'm just like, I know this kid. This is not, like, it's just surreal. I cannot believe that this is my kid. And what's crazy is I don't know how to help. I've tried to help. I can't help. He's hurting, and I can't fix it for him. And I just want to say, just so you know, yeah, I've got some questions. I mean, like David, I've got some questions. I was at practice the day of the injury. I was on the sidelines. And I was watching that. They got in a hitting drill, and he got matched up with this kid that was much older than him and twice his size. And I watched that kid lay into him. And he went straight back. And he landed on his back, and he hit his head on the turf. And he just kind of laid there motionless for quite a while. He couldn't see anything, he said. And after a minute or so, he got up, but he was clearly shaken. And that moment, I was like, oh man, but I had no idea what would follow that. But now that I know how serious it was, and we're sensing, and the doctors are sensing that this was like a catalyst moment for all the stuff he's gone through, I'll tell you what, that scene plays in my mind over and over and over. And trust me, I do wonder. I absolutely wonder, why, God? I mean, couldn't you have lined him up against a kid his own size? Or couldn't he have been sick that day? Like, God, I don't understand why. Why would you let that happen to my boy? And I think, man, just a little bit different timing. And his life might be very, very different. And so I'll just say, trust me, I've asked those questions. And as I do, I just keep coming back to the same core ideas, that God's heart is always loving. And his ways are always higher. And I don't have all the information. I don't know. I can't know. But I believe that God is good. And I also believe that he isn't finished. Cam's in an unbelievably outstanding treatment facility down in Malibu, California for depression. And he's starting to respond in some ways that are encouraging. And we have no idea how God might turn this into joy. There's a lot more story to be written. But here's what I'll tell you. I'll tell you that in my life, I have never felt the presence of God like I have in these last months. And I'll be like lying in bed at night, and it's just the worst. Because everything stops, right? And it's like there's nothing else to think about. And all the uncertainty and all the fear, they creep in. And I can start spinning out about all the worst case scenarios of all the things that could go on from here. And yet time and time again, the presence of God has sort of come into that, just washed into that situation and consumed me. And I can feel God whispering to me, like, I love you, Jason. And I love Cam. And I'm always working on your behalf. I know you can't see. I know you don't understand. But trust me. Trust me because I'm with you. And I will never leave you. And guys, I will tell you that in those moments, there is this unexplainable peace that just sort of washes over me. It comes in and it washes over me. And so I will proclaim to you from personal experience, there is nothing like the presence of God. And in this season, I've been powerfully reminded of how much I need him. And as I look back over my life, I realize if God was my on-demand God, if God gave me everything I wanted, I would be pretty content to just sort of live life without God's presence. If I never had to walk through any valleys, I don't think I'd actually care about God's presence. Now, I can feel him sometimes on the mountaintops, but it is in the valleys that I have come to know him best. And I'm convinced that there are times that God may allow you to get to a place where he's all you have. Because until he's all you have, you may never recognize that he's all you really need. I mean, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil because you're with me. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil because you're with me. God's ways are always loving. God's ways are always higher. And there is nothing, and I mean nothing, like the presence of God. And we think, okay, but wait a minute. If God loves me and he's powerful, isn't he just going to do what I want him to do? Well, yeah, sometimes he does. And he wants us to ask. That's part of learning to walk intimately with him. I mean, sometimes he hears your prayer and he moves in faith and he does a miracle and you look and you say, that is undeniably God. That was absolutely God in my life. And you worship him when that happens. And then there are other times when he doesn't. And guess what? You worship him when that happens too. Why? Because either way, he's still good. He's still good. And we think, but if I pray with enough faith, and I pray often enough, with enough faith, can't I get God to do whatever I want? No. No, you cannot. God is way too big for that. God is way too glorious, way too supreme to become a puppet to anyone. He's the sovereign creator. He's the king of all. And God has his own agenda. And you know what? It's better than mine. And it's better than yours. And so when you have questions or you have doubts, just know this, you haven't reached the end of the story yet. We are promised a glorious ending, and I, for one, believe it. And I believe it because Jesus was extraordinary. There's never been anybody like him. His love, his goodness, his focus. And he is a picture, he is the picture for us of what our Father looks like and how our Father loves us. And he came as the Lamb who laid down his life, but he's coming back as the King. And someday he's going to rule, and all that is wrong is going to be made right. But he is no on-demand God. And thank God he's not. He's the King. He's the King.